Okay, hello everyone. It's Dragan again. It's been like less than 2 months. We had that chat early August, and it was so good, and I couldn't wait to reconnect and follow up with a number of things that Dragan is posting. Really interesting content that I find super exciting, and I want to hear more. And people who are viewing this will enjoy high quality content that Dragan is sharing, and it's mostly I got intrigued by last time you talked about the observation points and intervention points. And you can talk about anything you want, but I would like to hear more about that. So over to you, Dragan.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me again, Alex. So yeah, there's this interesting thing that I started thinking about lately, and actually I picked it up from one of the. So it comes from the systems thinking, the idea of the intervention or leverage points in the system. So those points are the points where you apply a bit of change or a bit of change in those variables, but you see a huge impact. So that's kind of the idea of the leverage point, really high return on investment, so to say. And the observation or the monitoring points are is a term that I kind of heard, maybe a year ago or so, in one of the papers talking about the causal loop diagrams, which is a tool for reasoning about systems. It comes also from systems thinking. So I was kind of researching a bit more on this topic. And I found one really interesting thing that was mentioned there is this distinction between the intervention or leverage points and monitoring points, and how in lots of the cases, people tend to apply change to the monitoring points instead of the leverage points. So to give a real world example of these two, it would be a bathtub with, when you want to figure out the right temperature for the water, there's a difference between the leverage point and monitoring point in a sense that you monitor the result of the system on the shower, right? And you apply the leverage. The leverage point is the tap or the thermostat on the tap. And the really weird things happen when you try to apply change in the monitoring point, right? It would be look really silly to people observing the system in a sense, right? And still, that's one of the things that that I started. I mean, it was in the back of my head, but I started kind of noticing some of the maybe patterns, I don't know, when it comes to that. And it was interesting. So one of the examples also from our trade is the continuous integration, right? So how do we achieve continuous integration? Do we achieve it by trying to continuously integrate more, or we try to do some other things in order to have continuous integration? And very often it ends up as a side effect of the other things that we tend to do. So, if we build the quality in through continuous code reviews and reduce the delays in the reviews, and we also practice stage-driven development, so we have a really fast safety net that allows us to be able to integrate and deploy at any point in time. Then continuous integration is no event. It's nothing on top of that. Everything it's enabled by the other practices that come before that. So the continuous integration is done like more of state of the system, so to say, that we are able to monitor in a way. That's kind of one of the ideas. The other one also is perhaps the idea of the. I also recently started thinking about this, the idea of metrics, that we know about the idea of accidental complexity, which is the complexity that is not inherent to the problem or the domain, but the complexity that we humans kind of gradually added to the system without the need, so to say. So it's really solving the problem in the right. It can be not solving the right problem, or it can be optimizing parts that we don't need to optimize. It can be technical debt. It can be so many things, but it's something that can be avoided, right? And we should try to strive to minimize it. So when it comes to accidental complexity, I also noticed lots of the metrics being used as accidental complexity of a suboptimal, flawed underlying process. So what does that mean is that when you look at the, let's say, code coverage, right? So the teams that are trying to track the code coverage because they're doing unit testing after the fact, what they tend to do, they tend to rely on the tools, and they tend to rely on the metrics that actually they shouldn't in the first place, ideally, right? When I say ideally, I mean, it's not really ideally, it should be as it should be, right? Because when I say ideally, it can mean for most people, it's not achievable. It's not about that, but it's more about if we think in the proper way about the problem, these metrics shouldn't, and these tools shouldn't be there in the first place, right? So, I mean, we can talk about velocity in Scrum, or whoever came up with the idea of velocity. I'm actually not sure that it comes from Scrum, but anyway, the idea of code coverage and trying to chase the code coverage by constantly trying to figure out the amount of code that is not covered, and then trying to intervene, like chasing the coverage after the fact. One thing is there's really huge cognitive load that is causing on the teams, because they always have to have this in mind, right? So that the amount of toil is growing in the team, because it's taking capacity from the other more useful, most probably more useful stuff that they can work on. And the other thing is that so also buying the tools, or spending money for the tools that track this for you. That's and if we try to think about, are we able actually to change the process? So the process guarantees by default that this thing is so high that we don't need to track it at all, right? So then the idea of test-driven development really falls into place, and we, the teams that do test-driven development, I never look at the unit test coverage, right? At the code coverage, because by default the process guarantees it. So the tool is not necessary. We don't have to pay for it, or we don't have to have dependency on it, upgrade or whatever. Teams don't have to continuously look and monitor for those. So it's kind of accidental complexity of all of these. So trying to intervene at the point where this is actually a monitoring point in the system for these teams, but then they also try to intervene at that point. Okay, we have low coverage, let's try to increase the coverage. So it's a wrong thing to apply the intervention at. The other thing also that I think about is teams that are trying to look at the number of pull requests that they have currently opened, right? And they trying constantly to monitor the size of the pull requests, the number of pull requests open, and stuff like that. All of these metrics can be also an indicator, or most probably are an indicator of a suboptimal process that is underlying that, and it can be removed by changing the way that we work, which means, if we reduce the working process by applying more of co-creation patterns, meaning pair and mob programming, then we actually don't need to do that, because on top of the other things that we talked about, test-driven development, trunk-based development. I mean, even trunk-based development is a side effect of the things. If you reduce the amount of time that it takes to get a code review, you have a safety net, and all of the reviewers that are needed are there, then nothing is preventing us from pushing this to trunk. So the idea is, that also these teams that I tend to see very often trying to track the size of the pull requests, or time to merge, time to review, number of open pull requests, all of these things, I see them mostly as accidental complexity of a flawed underlying process, in a sense. Also limiting working process, right? Limiting working process, I started thinking about it. Actually, maybe not a good intervention point. Maybe we should intervene before that And the process guarantees the low WIP by default. Again, going back to co-creation patterns. So yeah, those are some of the things that I tend to think about when thinking about the distinction between these two.
Great, thanks. So the way I'm hearing you, two things. One is you like to go upstream from the symptom and maybe look at the root cause or whatever you call it. And secondly, it sounds to me it's all about frequency of feedback. If the feedback is delayed, then this lag time gives us the opportunity to flood in with all kinds of intervention points. And, by the time we realize, oh, something is not the way we were hoping it would be, what are we going to do, right? So now there is a saying in the Buddhist philosophy that if you throw a pebble at the dog and you hit the dog, it's going to hurt. So the dog is going to chase after the pebble. But if you do the same thing to a lion, the lion is going to chase after you, the perpetrator. So sometimes we're chasing after that hurtful pebble that hit us. It's a very good way of looking at things. And surprisingly, very surprisingly to me, when you talk about these things, it sounds like a revelation, although it should be common sense. But we're so, again, forest and trees, we're so nose to the grindstone. So like you're saying, focusing on code coverage and PRs and lag time and all that we don't take a step back and say, okay, why is this happening? But I believe there's maybe a deeper problem with this. And I'll just quickly explain what I mean by that. I was throughout my career doing a lot of hiring. I was in a position to do a lot of interviewing and hiring. And basically, when you are in the position of making a decision who's going to join the team, then you build this mentality that now if I hire someone, now I'm responsible for keeping track of that hire. I'm the manager, whatever, supervisor. And if you look at how we are tracking work, ideally, to me, software development is like a race with a baton, right? So when you have a team and you want the baton to be the first. So you should be keeping an eye on the baton. But what we're doing, we are keeping an eye on the runners. And I think this is a systemic issue that is somehow based with human propensity for pecking order and hierarchy. And, we are social animals, almost like dogs. Like we always have to, there's always layering in any situation. Somebody bubbles up to the top. And so if you look at the tools we're using, for example, Jira, it's completely calibrated to assign work to an individual. And then you hunt that individual corner and it's like, how is he going? Give me the report. And I think it's completely missing the point because the work is what matters, not the individuals, right? But I think we have this problem with agreeing to that and with saying, like I'm trying to say, one of my roles now is to transform the culture. So I'm like, if we're going to transform the culture, can we agree that the team is the smallest unit of the highest resolution? What happens inside the team is nobody's business outside, right? And the team lives and dies by their delivery, and how they figure it out, it's up to them, right? And if that can happen, it's easier said than done, of course, because people will. I think we all have difficulty. What's the word? Letting go and saying, okay, I'm not going to. I hire this person, and I have this need to track them and to keep an eye on how they're doing and all that. Maybe I should just step back. Maybe I should just leave them alone. And I've seen that happen in real life. In functional teams, these things can happen. The team sorts it out. Like if somebody's not pulling their weight or somebody, then there's an intervention inside the team. You don't need the manager to step in and say, okay, you're slacking or something like that. So what do you think about those types of ways of working?
Yeah. I think it's interesting in a sense of like the idea also of the roles, I seem very wary of those. Like if you think about product owner, I am, and that's my responsibility. So if I am to prescribe the features or say what is the next thing that needs to be done by the team, am I bringing the value at all? Because my role, the name of my role is, in a sense, saying that this is the thing that I should do. So if I don't do it, what's my value, in a sense? Or if we define testers as someone who is, trying to find as many bugs as possible, if they're not finding the bugs, there's identity crisis behind it. But of course, that's a problem with the definition of the role and even the name of the role that needs to be changed. And the same thing I tend to think about managers as if I don't try to reorder the parts in a way that I think is the best, then am I bringing enough value, in a sense, right? Because maybe I'm also looked at in the same way that I'm looking at my team, also like in this micro lens, so to say. So there's this thing with the roles, name of the roles being very powerful in the way that people reason about the things and their value in the company or the environment, teams, organization. And there's this other part also, which is also interesting, is I find it, so I've been kind of on the both sides, right? Inside of the teams and outside of the teams, and seeing it from both sides. And it's interesting, like just this fact in what kind of, I would say, a mess our industry is when it comes to the practices and the teams and stuff like that. Teams not being able to deliver, like a complete lack of predictability in any way, bugs, rework, failure demand, and damage relationship with the customers, with the stakeholders and stuff like that. And it's really kind of inviting also for micromanagement in a way. It's like there's this balancing act that from one way I also understand why people need to intervene in this level, trying to understand on the micro level what is going on in order to try to improve the situation, right? And then it comes, okay, who is doing what are you, focusing on, even as individuals and stuff like that. So I think this kind of over control as a response to this I think it's coming from the lack of practices, but it's causing all of these subsequent problems is also sometimes like, I don't know, maybe even I would think about it at least, like if I don't have the exposure to the ideas that I had, maybe I would even think about those the same. So I see it as kind of combination of this compositing factor, like where is this coming from and why is it coming from this place? And I find lots of the connections with really underperforming teams and a lot of autonomy. Autonomy is really seeked word in our industry, right? But there's a really huge lack of disproportional lack of mastery and competence in a sense. So yeah, it's like I give you autonomy, but it's like we have all of these problems that we mentioned, and then autonomy can be gone in a matter of weeks or months or whatever. So yeah, I also often think about these about these as well.
Yeah. Again, to me, this is all the symptom of absence of immediate feedback. And if we're doing a lot of work and feedback is not forthcoming, this creates some atmosphere of mystery. So something is hanging up in the air. We don't really know whether the changes we are making are in good way or bad way, and the business and the owners and what are still mystified. Like they can see that people are working, but usually it takes quite a long time until you see the actual effect of that work. And I think that creates a little bit of mistrust or the need to step in and say, okay, I need to, with a magnifying glass, I need to start looking at what are you guys doing? Because I feel very uneasy. My neck is on the line, you know.
Yeah.
And yet these guys are super busy, but I don't know, are they just surfing the web? Are they just telling jokes? I really don't know what's going on. And I believe if the more we tighten the screws and shorten the feedback cycles, the more decompressed people who are in charge and whose money is on the line, they can relax a little bit. But you know, I like to use this example. Let's say my uncle dies, gives me huge inheritance, and then I decide to take maybe $10 million play money, and I want to run a startup. And now it's my money, right? And now I really want to know what are these guys doing with my money, because every hour the clock is ticking, thousands of dollars down the drain. When am I going to see return, right? I'm getting nervous.
Yeah.
So
and you only had one uncle.
Well, yeah, one. No more, or the other uncles are super healthy and they may outlive me. So yeah, and so you know, it's natural, human nature that I want to control. Because if you own something, you cannot own something and say, I don't care if I control it, right? And again, we're going back to the question of ownership. Who owns it? And still, we live in a capitalist society where there's either shareholders or a private owner, but these people want control. They don't want to relinquish control. So all this talk about give full autonomy to the teams, and it's not that easy, right? Because nobody's going to say, yeah, let them rip. I'll leave them alone for a year, and they work their magic, and all of a sudden I'm super rich. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
But I feel, like you say, the intervention point, rather than being micromanaging or close observation, maybe it's better if the intervention point is enabling them to give short feedbacks. And that's why I think one of the, and you talk about that, one of the big factors of successful projects is frequency of deployments. Because the more frequently we can deploy, we assure our stakeholders or the owners that yes, there's something useful going on here.
Yeah, I think it even extends to the frequency of kind of releases, so something customer valuable, right? I mean, deployment is not really having to correspond to the customer value, but you know, how do we translate this into seeing frequent customer value delivery in a sense? So I definitely agree with that. It's kind of this idea of predictability and continuous delivery and small batches in order to enable faster feedback and stuff like that. So this continuous flow of things going out of the door, making, as you say, stakeholders decompress. And that's also because of, you know, stakeholders pouring lots of money and time into teams, and then waiting for a very long time in order to see any kind of results, so they're able to figure out to make an informed decision, right? So how to increase the frequency or the resolution of informed decisions, right? The way to do it is to have a continuous delivery of value in a sense, so they're able to be a bit less under pressure and less anxious about it, which is, you know, I think is completely valid and legit way. The same thing would be with me as well, right?
But still, when it comes to that, and you know, that's easy to explain, but I still find a lot of resistance, and this is coming from what some people call the finality premise. So that many people who are not experienced in that and haven't been through a lot, they prefer to have a big bang. Like they want to rush from A to B in straight line, and ta-da, there's a big bang and everything is done. And it's tougher to sell doing things iteratively or incrementally. They're like, okay, I want the entire product, bam. And if we say, look, how about we give you every week a little bit of something, and they're like, well, I don't get, well, why would that buy me anything, right? So it's another tough sell, because that's, you know, again, I think that's the people come from bricks and mortar into the virtual world, and dragging the concepts from bricks and mortar. Like you cannot sell me a house that's kind of incrementally being partially there, and then moving, and you keep adding things, right? So I expect when I buy a house, it's all done, right?
Yeah.
And with that mentality, if I go and now I'm building a software product, it's hard for me to accept that, you know, code is never done. It's always been blah, 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 right? So I think that this is another kind of almost training of the business to understand how software works.
Yeah, there are lots of, I mean, it's interesting because there are lots of the things that are built incrementally that we don't think about those, like in the real world as well. And I think an ex-colleague of mine mentioned to me one podcast called Incrementalism. These cases, right? And it's also interesting if you build your own house and you have, you know, people building house for you. I would be really interested to see a doesn't go very often to see where are currently and how it's progressing. So I think it's like this necessity to see the progress in a sense is actually in this world also there. But there's this other thing which is related to the world of, you know, digital products, where we know that we are able to, you know, deliver new thing very quick, very often, right? And people coming from different backgrounds are not used to this because it's completely different shift in the mindset. And most of the other things, or, you know, the things that they're coming in terms of their background are not like this, and it's a blind spot for them. They don't even think about that, you know? So it needs some time for them to get used to it and adapted to it, right? So because I mean, I'm trying to find an example in my head, like analogy of that. But you know, if you like I'm really curious about this kind of the idea of technology changing the things in the world, but the mindset lagging behind it. So, you know, once the world discovered, you know, Morse code, for example, and you know, people started switching from sending letters to sending you know, messages through telegraphy, right? Then what happened with the mindset itself? You know, I'm sure it was lagging in a sense because still people were writing lots of the huge letters before sending them, because that's the mindset that was created by the incentives of the system of the of the technology that was present at that moment. And then afterwards, switching the technology to something that is really cheap, you know, it's way cheaper to send the message now. I am not sure if they switch the idea, you know, from the idea of sending big letters to sending, because the cost is now way smaller immediately. You know, I also think about it when we think about like Amazon, what they did. So by the way, Amazon is really kind of interesting for me because they, Jeff Bezos is I would say proponent in theory of constraints. So he has these 3 top books that he gives to all of the senior executives that join company. And one of those books is The Goal from Alec Goldratt, which is a book about theory of constraints. And the interesting thing also, like in terms of the behavior that they see that Amazon changed, is because of this same day delivery or 1-day delivery. You know, you suddenly notice yourself that you're not batching the items in the shopping cart, but you're just swiping, you know, buy immediately. And, you know, it's coming in small batches today or tomorrow, but it's not, you know, it's not that we are batching the things, because the cost is 0 if you pay Prime, right? So then you're cost for ordering the items, and then, you know, it's change of behavior that I'm sure it took some time to adopt. So that's how I kind of relate to it in a sense.
To make things comically exaggerated, it's like first cars, when people created the first cars, and then the potential customer comes and says, "Oh, this is nice, but how do I fit a saddle on it?" Because they're used to riding horses, and It takes it takes a while to leave the old world behind.
Yeah,
for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's this part of getting accommodated to this new set of the incentives in this new environment that this technology enabled for lots of these lots of the people that are coming from very, let's say, traditional big batch backgrounds. Also, there's also the other idea that sometimes big batches are can bring you lots of the benefits in the environments that you work. So one of the things is that oftentimes in lots of the companies, big batches are the things that get you promotion.
Yeah.
So if you continuously deliver something in small batches, it's really kind of difficult to see this big effect and this drop down list of this list of the things that you have that you deliver in one go. So that's also like what are the incentives in the system that are set up for this?
You desensitize people to your delivery, and it's like you become like a janitor. Nobody notices when the bathrooms are clean. Nobody's applauding. As soon as there is a little bit of a speck, everybody's upset.
Yeah. I also have this idea that was interesting at one point, that actually lack of psychological safety also increases the batch size in a way that incrementalism also means that you're exposed and your work is exposed all the time to a feedback, because the feedback is immediate. If the feedback is immediate, you're going to see all of the mistakes that I make, and we know all of this from pair and mob programming, right? So if there's no psychological safety built into the system, then I might be scared to is vulnerable, and because lack of trust in the whole system, and because of that, I'm trying to gold plate the things, or increase the batch size to give some time before I ask for a feedback, so I'm sure that this thing is not going to cause damage to my reputation or whatever. So so in that sense also
that's the open source model. It's lack of trust, and I open source my product. Now I'm inviting anyone from anywhere in the world to jump in and make changes. I'm gonna be very careful what I merge into my product, right? And that rightly so, right? It completely makes sense. But the problem is when you have a cohesive small team that is very focused and adopt the open source model, and shooting yourself in the foot, because you already trust everybody on the team. Why these speed bumps and all these barriers and PRs? Like you say, if we're mobbing, it's all out in the clear, out in the open, and then during the Git flow and all that just doesn't make any sense. Which is what you talk a lot about, asynchronous work. Asynchronous is absolutely necessary in the open source community, right? And without that, it will be chaos. But in a closed source with cohesive teams, it's a detrimental. Right? And I think you are advocating for synchronous.
Yeah, completely. Like I'm trying still to. I mean, it's really interesting because this year and a half of pandemic or what? Year and a half now. Lots of folks have associated async work or remote work with the async work. So switching to a remote work started meaning for lots of orgs, lots of teams, lots of individuals, async work.
Should be the other way around. It's giving more opportunity for working synchronously, right?
Yes, it also exactly. Yes. It's giving also opportunities. That's kind of. I mean, it's it allowed for this in a sense because not all of us are in the same room, and I'm not that interruptible anymore because you send me a message and it goes.
And the facilities. Before the pandemic, I was teaching mob programming, but because the organization, first of all, is not high tech. Secondly, not geared towards mob, it was challenging to find facilities. So we would miss day because I couldn't book the room. I couldn't, here I can just like this, just pull the mob in and collaborate in real time.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about, now that we discussed a little bit the resolution from the outside and the feedback, sitting outside as the owner or stakeholder, and now you're interacting with makers, let's call them makers or software creators. But inside, when we go inside, ideally, and like you said, ideally means it's not achievable, but let's hope. I like the way I like.
I'm sorry, Alex. I would need just a couple of minutes. My daughter just woke up,
Sure.
and I just need to go there. I'm sorry for that. Yeah.
Sure, no problem. So I will pause and then let me know when you're back.
Okay. Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah,
no problem. All right, let's continue. So I think what I wanted to talk about is my ideal, how I imagine creating software, and you're going to laugh, but if you ever worked on collaboratively on Google Docs, you share a doc and then you may have 5 or 6 people. As we are making changes, everybody sees those changes in real time.
Yeah.
That to me would be ideal way of building software. So I'm making diffs and you're making diffs and we all see them right there, right? We don't have any intermediate step or any lag time, right? Of course, that's almost impossible because one of the dictums of that type of collaboration is that you shouldn't be able to break. Your changes should never be able to break the system. And of course, there's nothing you can break in a Google Doc, but it's easy to break. Using code as text, it's easy to break a software product.
Yeah.
And so barring that and not being able to do that, what is the nearest possible situation where, my first dictum is the system should be self-healing. So if I make a diff that breaks it, it should just automatically self-heal, meaning it just goes back to the nearest healthy state where everything is working, right? And so to that end, I think, it really helps if we have such system, or we're trying to build such system where it gives you the immediate feedback, and any change that you make that are compromising, it is gone, right? Now, some people hate that, right? But I like it because I do that a lot. It forces me to kind of walk on eggshells, to not be arrogant and brash. But I'm really, and also forces me to chop it down into micro, tiny little steps. And with each step, I verify that the system is still working or it's not. Forget it. I made the wrong turn. And so I'm hoping that kind of increased frequency of feedback will create more trust within the team or solidify that kind of confidence in what we're doing. Because right now there's a lot of this, again, lag, and we don't know, okay, this guy made some changes. When am I going to see it working? When am I going to see it on my local repo, right? It's pretty clunky. And I think that you're also referring to these things where not only time to merge, but also from the moment it's merged in the trunk, how long does it take until it makes its way into everybody's machine, right? Any comment on that?
Yeah, I guess that's the idea from Ken Beck about limbo and how low can you go.
And he worked on another project, I forgot the name, where it's directly manipulating the abstract syntax tree, right? I think he ended up with about 100 commands that you can actually, and I really like it, right? But
I am completely out for that, and there's this. I mean, like I started being interested in Smalltalk a couple of years ago. Sandy Matz really kind of influenced me in that sense. So Smalltalk is really interesting because of being a first, object-oriented language, and the IDE that they have was really interesting. It's actually still not achievable, or we don't still have it in modern IDEs, like when you think about IntelliJ or Visual Studio Code or whatever. The thing that it had was that the image was, the whole IDE was customizable by sending a commands to it, in a sense. So, and the code didn't have to compile because everything was in memory already. able to have in a sense. But anyway, going back to the topic that you mentioned and the idea, there is also this idea about the transaction cost and small batches, meaning that, or actually batch size, how do these two correlate? So the high transaction cost usually incentivizes the system to increase the batch size. And what I noticed also is that only reducing the transaction cost is not oftentimes helping teams to transition into small batches, right? So what I mean by this is that for the same reason that I talked about before with sending letters by a pony and sending letters to Morse code or email, right? That the mindset is the old one, and we carry it into the new world with the new constraints, set of the constraints. Same thing is here, that we reduce the transaction cost, but occasionally or often I don't see the reduction in batch size because there's this old mindset of doing things in the big batch. And then what they found is there's other incentive that can be also set up in the system, which is increasing the inventory cost. So which means the longer you keep the changes, the more it's going to cost you. The system is going to punish you more, so to say. And TCR is one of these examples where, if you make a big step, you're going to be punished for it, right? So the increase in the inventory is actually growing exponential because the increase of the cost with the bigger batches goes up exponentially. And what they found it forces people, serves as enabling constraint, as a forcing function for people to start thinking about smaller steps now, because compared to before. But there's also this caveat in a sense of, I can imagine also people just trying to do TCR and being punished for a big step, but instead of doing smaller steps, they start overthinking it. It's like trying to design in their head and compiling in their head before writing the code in order to go over this hump, even though that's a wrong thing to do. It's a crossroad, and this is a wrong turn to take, right? The better turn is, of course, to work on your incremental development skills and
exactly.
And make sure that
and that's why when I teach TDD, I always teach fake it till you make it, which means you start with a failing test, blah, blah, but then you make it pass by really faking it. Just supply hard-coded value, and then you refactor. But you also refactor very incrementally. You first refactor using primitives, then you circle back and you look at primitives and say, I'm not happy with that. I need an abstraction. And as you're moving, your code becomes more and more generic. Definitely TCR is a good way to do that. And the more I use TCR, when I go back to TDD, it feels so pedestrian. Right? But at first, it was very, very tough. Not for everyone, of course. But I believe it's pointing in the right direction. Like you say, to wean you off this big batches and big bang and impressive, heroic efforts and impress your colleagues and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had a chance to look at Dark or Dark Lang by Paul.
I heard about it on a couple of occasions, but I didn't dive.
I think it's a very, very interesting attempt to minimize accidental complexity and also to minimize this cognitive friction between code as text that computers don't understand and only humans understand, but then it takes few hops through the some hurdles for the computer to understand text. So in a way, I think it's in a very integrated environment where you just cannot. It's not possible to write a syntactically incorrect statement. It's always guaranteed to. So you cannot break the system. Of course, you can break semantically, and but I like that, but you just cannot break it. That the system doesn't even give you an option to make a typo or syntactical error, so it crashes, right? These are the things I'm enthused about, is because I don't see much value in this lag, right? Like you say, and that gives you the chance to stop. Okay, let's apply the brakes. I'm going it's funny thing when I'm teaching TDD and people who absolutely don't get it. And then after a while, they're like, oh, I get it now. First we go and we write all the tests. Then we go big batches, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not easy. It's a mindset shift. I mean, lots of the, yeah, I would say even damage was done by universities as well. How they teach programming and what. That was the case for me as well. And like for me, coming to realization after 10 years of industry experience or 15 or whatever, that object orientation is not about four principles of OP, inheritance, abstraction, encapsulation, and whatever, but it's about sending messages and message-oriented programming, so to say, or the focus is on the messages between the objects. So those are the things that, and then I started like going back, how many people have been taught in the same way, and it's like most of the people actually. And I mean, it might be kind of pessimistic, but like when you think about it, I think it's very difficult to turn the wheel in the other direction now, in terms of the industry, because because of this huge demand for people, for developers, it's attracting lots of people to the industry, and these people are also taught by the other people that are currently in the industry, right? And it's very hard to. And when you think about how many teams or companies have this kind of mindset and the culture to talking about, it's like under 5% for sure, even maybe under 1%. And it's growing. I mean, it's shrinking in the percentages, it's shrinking in the absolute numbers. So I see it as like a big bang, and like galaxy is being more and more distant in a sense. So it's very difficult to catch up in it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I remember I was teaching at universities. I was teaching software development, and let's say 20 years ago, or a little bit less than 20 years ago. And I was trying to add TDD to the curriculum, and they were like, no. And when you really kind of like, why? Because have you seen any job opening that's asking for TDD, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if it improved now, but really, first of all, very few TDD courses in the curriculum, right? In any institution. And then also, if you look at job descriptions, it's still not kind of the norm, which would be nice to see if you're looking for software creators, that they have some TDD skills, but that's not going to happen. But I just want to go quickly back to one thing I wanted to chat with you, which is we are teaching a lot of people, there's coaches and whatnot, we're teaching the way. So this is the way you do this, this is the way. And I feel like maybe that's not the best approach. I'm more interested, maybe tell me what you think, but instead of teaching the way, we teach the why. So why are we doing this, right? And then if we can agree on the why, then I think what's really important is to be able to identify outcomes that can be tracked. And so if you set expectations, like if I'm managing a team, I set some expectations and I can track them, and they're all based on the outcomes, then the team should be under some kind of a constraint and some kind of pressure to figure out the way to rise to those expectations. And instead of me telling them, you have to do TDD, you have to do mutation testing, you have to do TCR, let them, churn and try different ways until they figure out the most optimal way to do that. I think that would be a better motivator. But in my experience, it's very hard to find a team or organization that are tracking the right outcomes. It's mostly tracking outputs like number of storylines delivered, burn down charts, and it's really wrong metric. It does not. It just asks people to game the system, and So I don't know if I have any thoughts on that.
So I mean, the metrics that are used in most of the orgs tend to be very auto specific, incentivizing people for the wrong behavior, right? As Goldratt said, tell me how you measure me, and I'll tell you how I'll behave. So you can tell a lot about the company culture by trying to figure out what kind of metrics they have. But going back to this question about focusing on the outcomes, I think it's a good thing to do. But the other thing that they noticed in lots of the teams is they're completely lost in a sense that, like, these things that you talk about, you know, like how to shorten the feedback loops, how to increase deployment frequency, how to make, how to have way higher confidence that this thing is going to work in production. You know, these practices, we're talking about XP practices, it's completely out of the radar. It's like they're completely unaware of these. I mean, some of them have heard, some of them think that they try those or some of those, but actually didn't, you know, and like there's a vast majority of the people, but I rarely see teams like employing these in order to achieve these outcomes, because I don't know what's actually the reason for those. For lots of teams, it's actually a kind of blind spot because, you know, it's out of the radar. They haven't had a chance because of all of this other noise of 99% of the industry. They haven't had a chance to also to work. Maybe they read an article, right, or so, but they didn't have a chance to work in this kind of team. So this thing is, you know, or at least to try it. So this thing is like in the back of their mind. So I think there's a huge value that you want to achieve, but given the level of immaturity of the industry and the trade that we have, I'm not sure that the teams are able to go to achieve this on their own. And there's this, you know, autonomy and mastery and, you know,
purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So stepping into and trying to, you know, trying to help teams, guide them in a sense, and it's not easy in that way as well.
I would say,
yeah, I find that teams tend to feel lost lots of the time.
And also, I would say one thing, it may sound harsh, but I'm guilty of it. We've been getting away with the murder a long time and doing substandard and, you know, half-baked and cutting corners and seeing that doesn't matter, that there's no, like, are you kidding me? Everything is just, can you just, you know, try again? And that creates this kind of what's the word? Limp culture. We're like, hey, anything goes, you know, I'm needed, I'm required, I'm just going to bang up some code and go home. And yeah, of course it's going to be crappy, but you know, what do you expect? And there's not enough pressure pushing back from the community, whoever it is, customers or stakeholders, to say, guys, you gotta get your craft in order. This is really shoddy. We're not getting much pushback. Unless there's some catastrophe or some like really big problem. But shoddy code and code, you know, the hardens, and then later on, I want you to make this change. Oh, I wouldn't, you know, my advice is don't touch it. You know, something's going to break. And nobody says, are you kidding me? Like, we paid good money and now you're telling me I'm not able to touch it. All these things, I call it get away with the murder, right? And we've been given license to be really slack. Right?
Yeah.
So I believe until that changes, or some pressure, or I don't know, people don't like regulation, but look, any other industry is regulated. If you're building cars, if you're whatever, there's a building code and you have to comply, or else you wouldn't be able to put your product on the market. But in software, you and I can back up any crappy app and put it out, and there's no, it does not have to comply with anything, right?
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, so I also think that there's too much money in the world. And because of that, there's not much pressure, so to say. And so, you know, I think that orgs that are faced with lots of pressure when it comes to money, right? And then instead of trying to raise more money, they try to figure out the way that they work. And instead of raising more money in order to fund completely ineffective processes that they have, but they reevaluate and reinvent the way that they work. That usually doesn't happen, right? And because there, you know, I think there's too much capital in the world, so to say, especially with all of these real inflation and money printing and all of that. But that's a different topic. Anyway, that's kind of enabling constraint that is missing, I think, also. And the other thing is that going back again to the 99% of the industry, everyone is already used to this. So this is kind of, normal thing. It's there is also this book, I forgot what's the name of it, but it analyzed the Challenger flight catastrophe, right? And the topic of the book is actually the reason why it happened is this normalization of deviance, so-called, which means that people started being okay and treating normal the deviances in the system. The errors that the guys started getting used to it, and it was just a noise that was filtered out cognitively, in a sense, because they were so for such a long time used to it. And I also feel that the whole industry of ours is also in this state of deviance being normalized, and because of that, this is how it's supposed to work, or this is what is normal for whatever definition of normal. And even being called at 2 a.m. in the morning during a weekend is normal for lots of people.
And you're a hero. You're being like,
even making jokes on this, and creating culture around that's kind of really interesting. So,
and another thing is I'm noticing, maybe it's just my experience, which just by a sample, but we've been given almost unlimited retries. You do something, you mess up, and then you go like, oh, I'm sorry, why don't you try again, right? Instead of saying, look, get your act together, this is not acceptable, maybe 3 strikes are out or something. But I'm seeing a lot of people, they have a bug, here's a bug, they go and fix it, goes in, awesome, thank you, you guys are heroes. A few months later, same bug comes back. Try again. It's like, to me, it's like, really? I thought you fixed it. Like, what kind of engineering is this if the same bug keeps coming back over and over?
Yes, but there's also not the pressure from the market, right?
Yeah.
I mean, with this huge demand, it's way more expensive to try to hire a new engineer than to accept ongoing recurring failure that you have.
Yeah.
So it's also part of the story that we have, like one other missing constraint, enabling constraint that we have. So yeah, the other thing is also, like managers trying to keep the people happy. I mean, in certain type of the environments, because sometimes managers or oftentimes are measured by the churn that they have in the teams, because people paying money are really aware of the amount of time that it takes to hire new developers, how much does it cost, context switching, knowledge transfer, effect on the team culture and all these things. So, and then because that's the case, if I'm measured by the amount of churn, I'm going to do anything that is possible to shield, people in the team or keep them happy in any possible way. Yeah. So,
and also people complain about their managers, and that's not reflecting good on the managers. So they're trying to, like you say, be nice and everybody's happy and nobody's complaining, because that's how they're evaluated. Again, keeping an eye on the runner is not on the baton. Right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, really tough to change that focus, because I've been there. But, thankfully, I really enjoy reading your posts and tweets, as well as there's a few other people who are really shining the light on those topics. And maybe you're pessimistic, but you never know, right? Maybe something will slowly change. So thank you so much, Dragan. I won't keep any longer. I know it's very late in Berlin. This has been such a pleasure, and we'll chat again soon. See what's next.
Yeah, likewise from my side. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye bye.
I'm going to end the recording first.